Welcome back, fellow scientists. It is I, your fearless leader, Mr. Leo, with a beard and a t-shirt because it's the end of Christmas break. However, I am dedicated to pursuing knowledge whenever and wherever it may occur, so we will press on. Now, if you'll recall, photosynthesis, cellular respiration, we studied photosynthesis, we studied cellular respiration. Our last video was about fermentation. This video is not specifically addressing one of the learning objectives, but it is looking at one of our why should I care questions, right? So I promised you that I would relate cellular respiration to how we get energy and hopefully make you a better athlete through that. And so that's what this video is going to attempt to do. So go ahead and take out a blank piece of paper in your notes. This is going to be a lot of charts. I'll tell you what you need to write down when you need to write it down, but this is just kind of background information right now. So if you'll remember from chapter 2, talking all about macromolecules, we had carbohydrates, sugars, which are short-term energy storage. We had lipids, fats, which are long-term energy storage. And we had proteins, which are made of amino acids, which do stuff. Okay, so now as athletes, what organ do you use most? Some would argue the brain, and that's true, right? Athletes, it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of mental agility to be a good athlete. However, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the other organ that athletes use most, the muscle. Okay, so let's look at the structure of a muscle really quickly. So here's the shoulder, here's the upper arm, here's the lower arm. This is your bicep, this is your tricep. If we zoom in on your bicep, we see something that looks like this. If we zoom in on that, we see something that looks like this. If we zoom in on that, that is one muscle cell, right? So then a muscle cell has individual units called myofibrils in it, and each individual myofibril has something called a sarcomere in it that's full of actin and myosin. Actin and myosin is a fancy type of cytoskeleton. Right now, if you remember from chapter 7, what is one of the jobs of the cytoskeleton? Right, it changes the shape of the cell, okay? So if you think about muscles, the only thing that a muscle does is it contracts, okay? So if you have your arm like this and you want to do like this, your bicep is contracting. Now, if you want to bring it back to this position, right, your bicep doesn't do anything to bring it back to this position. It's your tricep that contracts and brings it back to that position. Muscles never push. Muscles never extend. Muscles only contract. That's why your body is made up of sets of opposing muscles, right? You got your back muscles and you got your abdominal muscles. You got your hamstrings and you got your quad, right? You got your bicep and you got your tricep, okay? Always opposing muscle systems because all they do is contract. And now, how do they contract? Well, the myosin heads, here we go. The myosin heads reach up and they grab onto actin, right? And then they pull. Okay, and then as they pull, this is called the sliding filament theory, by the way, and we haven't actually observed this physically with an electron microscope because stuff has to be dead. It can't be living. It can't be moving in an electron microscope. And you can't see this with a light microscope. It's too small. So this is the sliding filament theory. This is our best guess at how the world works. So it slides, it contracts, the two filaments slide past each other, right? And then it takes ATP, it takes energy to release the myosin heads from the actin. And then another cycle starts if the brain is still telling the muscle to contract, right? Now, if that seems backwards, that it takes energy to release, that's okay. I didn't misspeak. We talk about it later on in anatomy and physiology, so take that class because it's amazing. But I don't have time to go into that right now. So that's muscle. Right now, let's go back and let's focus on this chart right here. So this is a chart I use with AP Biology, right? Each of these little dots represents a molecule, and each of these lines represents an enzyme-catalyzed reaction. And what we've been studying, cellular respiration, is also known as the central metabolic pathway, okay? So the central metabolic pathway, this is glycolysis, this is Krebs, and then this is the electron transport chain. Okay, so what we've been studying is we've been taking sugar and we've been feeding it into glycolysis and then Krebs and then electron transport chain, and we figured out that we get between 30 and 38, depending on whose numbers you believe, of ATP for every one molecule of glucose that goes in. What this chart is telling us is that we don't have to eat sugar to get energy. Okay, if we eat fats, we can break those fats down. They can feed into the central metabolic pathway, and we can get energy from that. If we eat protein, we can break them down into amino acids. They feed into the central metabolic pathway at different points, and we can get energy. Even if we just ate nucleic acids, right, DNA and RNA, those also feed into the central metabolic pathway, and we can get energy from that, right? So big takeaway from this chart is that it doesn't necessarily matter what you eat. Just because you don't eat fat doesn't mean that your body will not store excess energy as fat. You could eat zero fat for your entire life, but you could be technically classified as obese if you eat too much sugar, because your body just takes that energy in. If you're not using it, then it stores it. And we know from our chart that fats, lipids, are the body's long-term way of storing energy long-term, right? You could eat nothing but fat, and if you used all of the energy that you put in, then your body wouldn't store anything. Your body would just convert that to energy and ATP, and it's all good, right? So that's this chart right here. Now, what I want to talk about is different sources of energy for muscle contraction. So go ahead and write down these 5 words: ATP, creatine, fermentation, cellular respiration, muscle contraction, and write them down kind of in this order. And I want to talk about how each of these 4 things relate to muscle contraction, how they feed into muscle contraction, right? So red pen, here we go. So ATP, your muscles store enough ATP for approximately 1 to 2 seconds of activity. It's not a lot. ATP is highly reactive, it's not very stable, and thinking about diffusion osmosis, if we had a lot of ATP molecules, water would rush in and cells would burst, and not very good. Okay, so that's enough to take like 1 or 2 steps, even in a sprint, in a 100-meter dash, right? So after you're done using ATP, then your muscles will switch to a compound known as creatine. I guarantee that most of you have heard that before because it's a workout supplement, right? So basically, creatine occurs in 2 forms. We have creatine phosphate, which, as you can tell by the name, has a phosphate group attached to it, and we have just regular creatine. Right, so as your muscles use ATP and turn it into ADP, then you have a lot of ADP and you need to recharge that. You need to make more ATP. So what creatine phosphate does, it gives up one of its phosphate groups to ADP, and then that turns it into ATP, and then creatine goes and gets recharged through a different mechanism, right? So this is enough energy for about 15 seconds of activity, right? So creatine, you can use that for about 15 seconds. Now, in reality, your cells are using all of these mechanisms most of the time, right? But if you just use that, that would be enough for about 15 seconds. Okay, after 15 seconds, if your physical activity lasts longer than that, then your body switches to fermentation, right? We're assuming that you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, or you're, in a 400-meter race or something like that, and you're just going and your red blood cells can't carry enough oxygen. So remember from the last video, fermentation is basically glycolysis, which makes pyruvic acid. And then the fermentation part of it is it takes that pyruvic acid, makes it into lactic acid, and then that creates an empty basket. That creates a NAD+, sorry, sloppy handwriting, which goes back and can let glycolysis happen, and then we get a net gain of 2 ATP from that. Your body can't last forever. Your body can't last for a long time doing just that. In fact, your body can only last for about 30 to 60 seconds if you just use fermentation. So 30 to 60 seconds. Okay, now let's say that you want to exercise longer than that. Well, you are going to be kind of using ATP and creatine, maybe not so much fermentation. That, by the way, the fancy name for it is anaerobic, without oxygen, right? Workout. So most of the time, most of our workouts are going to be fueled by cellular respiration. Okay, so cellular respiration, as we've talked about before, relies on carbohydrates, relies on sugar. All right, your muscles and your liver stores sugar in a form known as glycogen. Okay, so we'll just say GLY, glycogen, and your muscles and liver store enough glycogen for about 15 to 20 minutes of exercise, of working out. So 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, and that is, by the way, aerobic respiration. right? You'll notice that right here. Aerobic respiration is with oxygen. Okay, anaerobic respiration right here is without oxygen. Okay, so those are two important words. Make sure that you write those down for fermentation and for cellular respiration. Fermentation is anaerobic, cellular respiration is aerobic. Okay, so basically for the first 15 to 20 minutes of your workout, you're just burning sugars, which of course after you work out, you're going to want to eat, you're going to want to, you know, replenish your fluid and your food. So basically after you finish a workout, if you eat, then like you haven't really gained anything. Like, yeah, cardiovascular health, yeah, you know, increasing strength, blah, 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 blah. But in terms of calories and in terms of energy, you're not really doing anything, right? After 15 to 20 minutes, your body has run out of supplies of glycogen. So then it switches. Then and only then does it switch to burning fats and lipids, okay? So instead of sugars, glycogen, feeding into the central metabolic pathway, now we have lipids feeding into the central metabolic pathway. So if we use lipids after 15 to 20 minutes, so this is lipids, right, then we can go for hours. You want to go for a 3-hour run? Great, you can do that. You want to go for a 5-hour bike ride? Great, you can do that. Because our body, God has created our bodies amazingly well, and it can burn sugar or it can burn lipids, depending on what we're doing. Okay, so now, how does this relate to working out? Well, you may or may not have heard these terms before, but there are different kinds of muscles known as fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, right? Sprinters, like this male right here and this female right here, have fast twitch muscles. Their workout is going to be short, it's going to be intense, it's going to be max reps. Sprinters spend as much time in the gym lifting weights as they do on the track, running, preparing for starts, right? Sprinters will be using ATP, they'll be using creatine, they will mainly be using fermentation, right? They might work out all day long, but they're going to work out in little bursts. They're going to do, you know, max reps and then recover, and then max reps and then recover, and then max reps and then recover. They're not really focusing on losing weight. They're focusing on gaining weight. They're going to eat a lot of protein because they need to build their muscles, right? But they're not really going to be worried about burning fat, okay? Marathon runners, on the other hand, this would be a marathon runner's body. Male marathon runner, female marathon runner. Notice muscles are not as big. If we could look at them microscopically, we would see that they have a lot more mitochondria than a fast twitch muscle type, right? And they don't spend hardly any time in the gym. They just go out and run and run and run and run, and then when they get tired, they run some more. So they will be not necessarily using a lot of fermentation, they will be using more cellular respiration, and they will run through their sugar supplies in about 15 to 20 minutes, and then their bodies will start converting any lipids that they may have into ATP for energy. So this has been Mr. Leo. Hopefully the video has made you a more informed and better athlete. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I will see you on the flip side.